All right, to kick this off, let's talk about the Fed dual mandate. And so while that's not on here, I want to, go over the Fed's dual mandate real quick. So the Fed dual mandate is this. It's firstly your teeter-totter. All right, that's how we're going to look at this thing. It is a teeter-totter where they are trying to control two things, right? They are trying to achieve two economic goals, if you will. The first one is being maximum employment. All right. And maximum employment, when you really boil this thing down, it's really just like, what is the lowest unemployment number that we can be at, which is like not going to be earth shattering. All right. So when we talk about like maximum employment, it doesn't mean that everyone has a job. It just means that there's not so many unemployed people that there's an issue. And the other one is stable prices. All right. So when they're going through and they're talking about stable prices, right, they're targeting this like 2% inflation rate. All right. So if we're looking at this, guys, like this is why it gets a little weird. Like they want people to have jobs, and yet they want to control money to where money's not, wild. But here's the thing. Companies borrow money and then companies spend money, and some of that goes to widgets and some of it goes to overhead, whether it's leases or employment. And so that's where it gets weird because, again, if a company's having to spend big dollars by borrowing big money to be able to employ some people, that's why like this dual mandate's really, really hard to level out and be like, okay, cool, enough people have jobs, as well as prices aren't getting out of control. And one department in the grand scheme of things is running both of those. So that's why this gets a little bit harder. All right. So knowing that that's the dual mandate that the Fed has, right? Let's make sure that enough people are not jobless, because that's really what it is. It's not like make sure everyone has jobs. It's like, let's make sure that a bunch of people aren't jobless. And then let's not make sure that inflation is going above this 2% mark. So then when we look at this, there's this term called stagflation. All right. So stagflation is actually like the scariest version of everything that could happen. And so I went to Investopedia just so that I could like get the terminology. All right, so stagflation, this is what we're looking at on the screen. It's a stagflation is the appearance in an economy of slow growth, high unemployment, and rising prices. Okay, cool. So we know the Fed's dual mandate, this teeter totter, if you will. And so, firstly, they want to make sure that the economy is still growing. Well, what does that mean? Well, people are spending money. All right, so they want to make sure that people are still spending money and that we don't have slow growth. Well, they also want to make sure that we don't have high unemployment, a stagflation. Well, again, high unemployment, their only thing is that they want to have the lowest sustainable unemployment. All right. Like it's okay if there's people jobless. We just don't want to have a lot of jobless people. Like that's really this dual mandate. And the third one is this rising prices. So what they're saying is they want to see the economy still grow and people are still buying stuff. Okay, we're still going to Amazon. We're still buying gas. We're going to talk about gas here. We're still buying gas. We're able to, maybe go on that once a year vacation with the family, whatever that looks like. Right, the economy's still moving. They want to see people still employed, and they want to see prices not getting outrageous, right? To where we're not just racking up credit card bills, even though people are already racking up credit card bills. All right. So it says one thought by economists to be impossible as anything but a short-term problem. Stagflation appearance in the 1970s has had monetary officials on guard ever since. Okay, cool. So they're saying like, all right, well, this hasn't happened since the 1970s. This is still one of these things that's going to come up, and it's coming up right now. Like we're actually hearing conversations about this, especially with everything that's happening overseas with the war in Iran right now. Is that this conversation starting to pop back up? And it says policy solutions for slow growth tend to worsen inflation, right? Because when they go through and when they want to stop inflation, right? How do you stop inflation? Well, you stop the flow of money. How do you stop the flow of money? Well, you put the constraints on borrowing money to where it's expensive. Guys, and we're living through this as real estate agents, right? We deal with the highest ticket item most Americans purchase in their life, and when we're talking about the tune of $600,000, which is our average price point in the Denver metro, we couple that with a 6% interest rate. You guys are already living through this. But selfishly, that's where we go because that's our jobs. Okay. So let's just think of everything else where we're going through and people are actually going in, they're like, well, we're not going to go purchase XYZ, which we typically would. And let's just go for like more everyday items, right? Maybe it's an extra meal out. All right. So they're not going out and they're going to, pull back their food budgets. Maybe they're going to go and they're going to pull back, gym memberships. Like they're going to go and they're going to go after discretionary funds first. But then it gets a little bit worse, right? Because then what we could see is that people are actually, well, maybe I'm just going to skip a meal entirely, right? Because prices are going up, and so people have to pull back. So that's what this thing does is when they're going after inflation, they start tightening the cost of money and vice versa, right? So this is where we see this teeter totter, and it's very, very hard to level it out because if we're going through, we're making the cost of money cheap, more people are going to have jobs because more widgets are being bought. More widgets are being bought, so they need more employees to build those widgets. And so we're going to see employment go up. But what happens? Well, there's so much demand, the prices start going up, guys. And we lived in this with cheap interest rates, guys. This is 2021 all over again. All right. Like this is the conversation that I think that we can wrap our heads around as real estate agents because we lived it in 2021, right? We saw multiple offer situations. We saw hundreds of $1,000s over asking because money was pretty much free. We saw crazy buying patterns because buyers were giving up their contingencies. They were waiving appraisals. They were coming X amount of dollars over asking, and they were giving the naming rights to their firstborn children away, right? Like we were seeing this kind of stuff. And this is absolutely what the government wants to avoid going forward. And then so they keep these rates risen. Well, then what happens? Well, then they have a threshold. And this is where it gets a little weird because now the threshold says we are comfortable with X amount of people being unemployed. All right. That's this dual mandate. And this is where it gets crazy. We don't want to see a lot of money flowing because people will just spend money and prices will start going up and we'll see inflation and all kinds of craziness. So the alternative is to keep money high. People will start spending less and eventually people start losing some jobs. All right. So here's your image of this. Again, this is Investopedia, and it says the economic cycle characterized by slow growth, a high unemployment rate, and high inflation. All right. So Housing Wire puts out this deal on the 6th, so last week, and it says this. It says, "Hey, negative jobs reports keeps mortgages rates calm, aimed surging oil prices." Okay, so what are we touching here? Well, we're touching inflation. All right, we're touching inflation here as far as surging oil prices, but we're also talking about negative jobs reports. So what they're saying is like, hey, we're seeing some stuff, but the Fed is still not moving on anything. All right. The Fed is staying in a holding pattern. So let's look at this thing. All right. It says oil prices are surging and mortgage rates are roughly flat. All right. This was as of the 6th. And we've seen a little bit of change in this, a little bit. It says it's been a crazy day in the bond market. And this is what's actually pushing a lot of stuff around. So if we look at this, it says your monthly change in employment by industry as of February. Okay. Rear view facing data. This is March 10th. And when we're looking at this, so the government, okay, so the government's negative, which we understood this, right? This is your whole Doge effect still going into effect right here. Your other services, your leisure and hospitality down, private education and health services down, professional and business services down, financial activities up, right, guys? And we're seeing this, but as we're going through and we're looking at this is what I like to keep in mind when we have these conversations, and remember, I always put an asterisk on this particular conversation, it's around employment and people purchasing housing. We as real estate agents have to understand that unemployment in a recession, it's actually not bad for real estate agents. All right. There's an asterisk by this because it's super un-American for anyone to go home and to be praying that people start losing their jobs because you'll sell more houses. All right. So when we look at this is the reason why. These, right, we look at leisure and hospitality, private education, right, and health services. Like the health services, okay, but like the private education, guys, these are the jobs that are going negative. Well, if we're looking at this, we have to be thinking about, let's go just with leisure and hospitality. We could also go look at like um, some other things. But like when we go and we have this conversation, think about what this avatar of this person might look like. All right, let's start thinking about your McDonald's workers. Let's start thinking about Qdoba workers. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those people, right? What I am saying though is this, that's typically not your buyer avatar either, right? Like you're not typically going out and showing houses, especially here in Colorado, at a $600,000 price point to someone earning around like $20 an hour, working, 20 to 40 hours a week, maybe, especially if they're not a dual income family. We live in Colorado. It's a very, very expensive place to live. So when we look at this and we start thinking about the industries that are impacted the most about unemployment, it's the labor ready demographics of your workforce. This is not your you don't see like CEOs losing their job, like right, like I know there's not a CEO section here. You don't see your B suite management, right? Like you don't see any of this in there. And I understand that it doesn't read that way, but what happens, it is the lower echelon of the dollar per hour employees that start losing their jobs first. And that's typically not your buyer profile that you're typically working with. So as we look at this, we look at the jobs that are happening and we see this and we say, okay, well, this looks bad, especially here, right? We're seeing a pretty big decrease overall. But then we go through and here's your unemployment rate. Well, unemployment's pretty flat, right? Okay, so here's 2020. We all lived through the global pandemic. And then we get to this place where, okay, well, unemployment's staying relatively flat. Like we're not seeing anything. And here's what the Fed, I say the government, here's what the Fed said last year in a presser. They said, well, hey, listen, if not another American gets a job, we're okay with that. And again, that goes back to this dual mandate. The Fed doesn't care, how many people have jobs. They just care how many people don't have jobs. All right. Like they have a threshold, they have a floor. All right. The Fed has a floor, and that's where they're trying to live. They don't want to go below the floor because that's an issue, but they don't care how high they go either as far as employment numbers. They don't care if every American has a job. They just say, hey, there's an acceptable amount of people to not have jobs in the United States of America. All right. So we're at this 4%, which is pretty flat when we look at this. Here is your contractors. And the contractor guys, this one's important to us in our industry because, right, these are your trade workers. These are your tile people. These are your electricians. These are your plumbers. So as we're looking at this graph is going to show you how many people are going out and actually purchasing new builds, right? Like this is like your new build graph. If I'm going to look at this, I'm going to tie it to anything. I'm going to go through and I'm going to say, okay, so this is my graph of how many trades are still employed that didn't have to get out of the construction business to go, work at another job. And we're looking at this, and while we did see a little bit of a dip, I think we're okay with this. Like I'm looking at this, I'm saying, no, there's no real issue here. Here's 2020. All right, there's like we can look at this. We have conversations all day about this, and we kind of all know what was happening. New builds weren't going to get caught holding the bag anymore. Remember the big short? And so we saw this and they were like, we're not going to we're not going to keep building because we've got a lot of inventory to still sell. Well, we understand what happened in 2020 as well. The world shut down. So if we're looking at this, like there's no concern here. Contractors still have jobs, which means that they are still going in and new builds are still happening. So if we look at all employees in the residential building construction, again, still pretty flat. All right. Again, we can look at here with the big short and global pandemic. So it goes to the conclusion. It says, this has been a crazy week. And it's also been a crazy day. And it says, we're going to go through. It says the oil story is getting worse. Once oil prices broke over $82 a barrel, they had the potential to go much higher. And that's has happened today. It's getting as high as $92. And again, this was last week. And so I know that there's calls right now to open up the oil reserves in the United States. All right. So we actually have oil reserves. And while I'm super uneducated on what's going on in Venezuela as well, I also kind of understand that we're kind of like in custody or like the trustor or something with the oil reserves that are in Venezuela right now. And so Oil prices are still probably going to go up until something starts to happen. And so we're just going to have to ride this out a little bit. But I do want to shift gears. And this is going to be a conversation that we're going to continue to have just with the cost, right? Because this is still a cost conversation. It says seniors want to age in place, but family caregivers face strains on multiple fronts. All right, cool. So, again, let's talk about the life cycle of a house, and we're just going to talk about historically speaking. All right, so bear with me on this. You have two kids, they go off to college, they fall in love, they go get an apartment together, they get married, they start wanting to build a family, buy a small house, the kids start growing older, they need a bigger house, they buy a bigger house, the kids go off to college, the parents start getting older and they go into a smaller house, and that house gets sold, and right, it just keeps going in this cycle, right? This is your cycle of real estate. Well, the cycle's broken. All right, we've been living through this for a few years now. Mostly it's because of inventory constraints, and the inventory constraints are really tied to money, the cost of money right now. All right, and we have to think about this. Let's think about this logically. If someone bought their home in whatever year, right, we're going to go through, and they were able to probably buy bigger homes over the last whatever, however many years ago. Now, with the cost of money, there's lesser inventory, and with the lesser inventory, they have to, maybe we would call it, right size into a home that doesn't necessarily make them happy. And so what are they doing? They're staying in their larger estates. All right. These families with these 2,500 square foot, I mean, even down to 2,000, right? 3,000 square foot, you were seeing elderly family members living in this, no kids, no one else. And what is happening? Well, that is putting into a constraint on these families that need to upsize because they have nowhere to go now because there's less inventory on the board because we're not selling, we're not keeping in this cycle. All right. So when we look at this, guys, this is also why the prices are staying elevated across the board in the United States. All right. We can actually look at this and say, well, there's not enough inventory. And this is one of the big reasons why. Yeah, I get it. There's condos, there's all kinds of stuff. I don't know if you guys have looked at condos. I was just looking for fun the other day. And guys, we're talking, you can go buy a $200,000 condo right now, very real. And you're paying north of $500 a month in HOA dues, which is super nutty. And so this is some of the options that they have. Cool. You can right size into a condo and pay $500 a month to the HOA and really have no benefit out of it. So this is a survey, and it says it's finding that 10% of the US adults care for parents that are 65 plus, with caregiving more common among women and lower income adults. Responsibilities range from errands to personal care. Caregiving strengthens relationships. Okay, cool. The AI got a little weird. All right. So when we're looking at this, it says, hey, they surveyed about 9,000 adults, and roughly out of that 9,900 said that, hey, they're caregivers to their parents. Another 3% for a spouse or partner. And while less than 1% said it's both. Okay, that sounds like a big, big job. All right, so similarly, 25% of adults with aging spouses or partners report being a caregiver. And it says the rise from 21% of spouses 65 to 74 with 32. Okay, cool. So we're looking at this, guys, and it's baby boomers. All right, let's just land on what it is. It's baby boomers. And so when we're looking at this, now there's decisions that need to be made. We're also talking about the greatest wealth transfer we will ever see as a society. And so when we're looking at this, we have real estate holdings that have an aging parent or potentially a spouse in them. And they're saying, well, hey, I just want to age in my house. I don't want to go to the condo for whatever reason. Maybe it's an emotional reason behind it, or maybe it's just like, hey, $6,000 a year in HOA fees does not make a whole lot of sense for me. And so they're going through and they're staying in their homes. And so as we're looking at this, guys, this opens up a lot of stuff, mainly because when we're going through, this is inventory that's being locked up. So what we are seeing is we are seeing either the aging parent that's staying in their house, the kids are keeping their home, or what we could see is the kids, and I say kids loosely, they move in with the aging parent and they're renting their home. Or we're seeing the aging parent move in with their kid and this home is being rented. And we are seeing a lot of people turn into landlords that didn't have any plan to be landlords, but what they're doing is they are still holding on to the property. We are seeing this is a very real situation that we are running into. We are seeing people become landlords overnight that had no intention to be landlords because of stuff like this that is going on. So when we're going through, right, what it's looking at it saying, hey, what's the weight of this, right? It says 56% of adults who regularly help a parent report that caregiving has a positive impact. Okay, cool. 44% of those says that is a net positive impact on the relationship. Because so a lot of this is relationship driven. But as we're looking at it, it says, well, hey, in a separate survey, found that most adults 65 and older live in their own homes or apartments. Okay. So 93% of these population, which means this is inventory that won't come off the board, it is going to stay on the board, and no one is going to be able to access this until a major life event happens. It says a smaller share of these respondents said that they live in a home of an adult child or another family member. Okay, so when we were just talking about they make the decision, that's a very, very small number. Most of these guys are truly staying in place. They are aging in place. They're not going anywhere, guys. And this is why inventory is staying up. It says upper income adults are more likely to prefer assisted living. And it says the middle or lower income, right? And so when we look at this, we understand we've seen inflation. We have seen inflation. We looked at this at the last team rally, that we are seeing a bigger and bigger divide between the upper class and middle class, which is turning more into the lower class at this point. And the reason for that is because of inflation. Inflation is a threat to democracy because what happens? Well, when you talk about the more affluent, the upper class individuals, they are less dependent on borrowing money. So interest rates don't necessarily matter. All right. They don't necessarily matter. They can still acquire assets and the rich just get richer. Well, what happens? Your middle class, your lower class, the people that are living paycheck to paycheck, they depend on the cost of money. And so if the cost of money gets too high, they don't acquire as many assets and the divide just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So as I read this, what I'm reading is the upper income adults that can afford assisted living are maybe going to assisted living. They're not worried about their monthly, right? And when we look at this, guys, I don't know if anyone has looked in Arvada, right? We're talking $2, $3, $4, $6,000 a month. Like this is not cheap. And so, yes, I get it. If we bought a house in the 1990s for $200,000, likelihood it's worth about $1 million right now. And so, but when we go through, they sell that asset. Now they're getting through. And depending on what quality of life is and life expectancy, they're going to go through this money pretty quick, right? You talk about 62 or $6,000 a month at 12 months. That's $72,000 a year, everyone. $72,000 a year, and you have $1 million. It's not going very far. And so these are the conversations that we're going to be having more and more and more as things like this are happening. And we're just going to be very well aware of this. This is one of the big, big reasons why we're not going to see a lot of inventory hit the board and why home prices aren't going to drop. And speaking about inventory being up, right, as we're looking up, we can talk about it being up, but look at this. So here you are. Here you are in 2006. Here's your gray line. There's 2020. Your dark green line, that's 18. Your light gray line, that's 19. And this other green line, all these green lines, 2018. Well, guys, keep in mind this. Our last normal market, we would consider 2019. All right, your last normal market, 2019. Remember, global pandemic, super low interest rates. We saw interest rates go up very, very quickly, and they stayed elevated. That's this. All right, that's this section outside of 2020. But here, what's going on? Well, we look at 2019, look at 2018, 2017, we had less population in the United States than we have today. We're a growing population for various reasons. And so you have less inventory for sale today than they had in 2019. That's an issue. This is why inventory is constrained and prices are staying up. We can look at these other graphs, which is interesting. It does tell a story. Here you go. Here's 25 to 26. Here's your geography lesson. You are this square right here. And so we do have 17% more inventory today than we did versus last year, 25 versus 26 February data. Well, as we're looking at this as well, we also, it doesn't say, hey, what the housing inventory is. This could be condos, this could be a lot of stuff. We just know that it's up. Pretty much everyone's up, right? We do see some of these, like, here's a little bit, right? We see a little bit of flickers where the inventory is down. But as we're going through, here's your 2019. So again, in Colorado, it's still 26% up across Colorado, 2019 versus today. And yet, what we're also seeing is the inventory is up on the board. We're seeing homes sit for a little bit longer, and yet prices are still elevated. We are still seeing the right priced home with multiple offer situations come off the board very quickly over the weekend. And again, we are seeing the homes that are maybe pricing out your first time home buyers that are sitting longer. And a lot of this is driven by your HOAs. Guys, and we're never going to be able to address that, right? We can say, oh, well, there's a lot of inventory on the board. We got 26% more inventory on the board today than we did in 2019. But yet the issue is there's still an affordability problem. We have an affordability problem specifically here in Colorado, right? Again, I challenge anyone, like, go on to Zillow, right? You don't even have to go on the MLS. Go on to Zillow and do it. Go look at condos, go put in the parameters, and go start hunting through their HOA fees. Their HOA fees are astronomical right now. And so when you start thinking about first-time home buyers and their ability, because what do we know right now? Your first-time home buyer is 40 years old, and their down payment is 10%. Okay, so even if we look at a $200,000-$300,000 condo, which is $20,000 to $30,000 down, okay, more achievable than 50 and 60. They're also having to come up with $500 a month, which is another $6,000 a year in just HOA dues. And guys, you look at what their HOA is covering, whether they got trash, maybe water, there could be a pool, maybe, right? Like, they're not getting a lot out of that money. And so, like, it's not super affordable, even though we see this number and we're like, okay, tons of inventory. Prices aren't going down for that reason, because the homes that people can afford are still going off quickly. Let's shift it over. Let's look at Logan Motorshami, right? He says housing demand is up and inventory is down, even with the Iran conflict. All right, so I called it a war earlier, and we're seeing that Housing Wire is calling it a conflict. So weekly housing indicators were broadly positive. All right, we like that, including 3 straight weeks of year-over-year gains in pending home sales. Like that as well. So let's look at your weekly pending. So here we guys go. You are this dark line right here. 2026, we have more inventory under contract. Okay, guys, the golden handcuffs have come off, right? The people that said, hey, the lock-in effect with the 3% interest rates, guys, this is falling away more and more and more every year. The thing is this, people aren't afraid of a 6% interest rate. Yeah, it's not super awesome. The issue that we're running into right now because of 6% interest rates is that they are looking at the home and saying, does this home check multiple check boxes before I go through and sign the paperwork? We keep hearing more and more of these people saying, this is my forever home. And again, they don't necessarily mean forever home. They're just saying, I don't want to have to go buy a house 5 years from now, right? Like, if I were to go through and I were to purchase this home today with interest rates being what they are and my monthly payment being what it is, and the down payment of $50,000 to $60,000 as a 40-year-old, I don't want to have to move again in the near future. That's an affordability issue. Your purchase mortgage application data, here it is, guys. And so we've been talking about this in the last couple of weeks. We've been watching these numbers fall and fall and fall. And the conversation's been like, don't worry. This is still good news. And here it is. We had a little bit of an uptick. So if we look at this and we follow, we say, okay, cool. There's a little bit of seasonality. And while and we looked at, we're like frozen iguanas in Florida, we can see that, no, this is just really just the natural progression. And here we are, and we're popping back out of it. And year over year, guys, this is good news. What this is still saying is more people are reaching out to lenders to figure out what they qualify for. Now, with that being said, asterisk. Some of this information is definitely refinances. We're at 6% interest rates. And believe it or not, 6% is still a good place to refinance because there's people that are at like 8. And so we are seeing that. What we're also seeing, though, again, is buyers are coming out and they're saying, like, hey, I've been sitting on the fence for so long, my butt is tired. Like, it's time for me to go purchase. CNN, Fox News, YouTube, X, they've all been lying to me about the housing crash, the Airbnb bust, the silver tsunami, insert whatever garbage here. And so now they're coming through and they are reaching out to lenders to figure out what they qualify for. Because, guys, keep in mind, you are in a business that is driven 100% by motivations. 2021, where we were going through, and the motivation was 100% interest rates were cheap, and I want a different view. People, life events. We're having people get married. We're having people have babies. We're having people get divorced. We're having people pass away. We're having promotions. We're having demotions. We're having all kinds of stuff. This is the cycle of life in real estate. So these people are like, life's happening. They're raising their hand. They're figuring out what they qualify for. Do not be the agent whose buddy uses another real estate agent and not you because you aren't having conversations because you don't think anybody's buying in this market. They are. They absolutely are. I'm not going to talk about the 10-year yield or the mortgage spreads, but let's look at the housing inventory. Again, guys, like here we are. Like you're in 2026, we're still higher than the last 5 years. But again, like this is not good enough. This is not good enough. We just looked at Resi Club data, and Resi Club showed that we were less than 2019, we were less than 2018, we were less than 2017, and the United States population is larger. This is why home prices are going to remain elevated. There's not enough inventory. We will never outbuild. Guys, we can have conversations all day long. And I know we live in Colorado and we see the building. We will never, ever, ever be able to outbuild the inventory shortage that we have in the United States because, quite simply, the builders are not motivated to do this. They are not a nonprofit. They are not the March of Dimes. They are for-profit companies that answer to stockholders. So what does that mean? Well, that means that they're going to go through and they're not going to sell houses at a loss. They are going to keep the drip on, the spigots to a slower drip so they can keep prices elevated so they can deliver prices to their shareholders and continue to make money. But we go through and here's your new listings. Again, guys, like we're right in the mix. There's nothing super exciting about this, right? 25 is a red. This is like a very Christmassy graph. This lime green thing is 24. So you're just slightly above and we're still going in the right direction. Again, we had some seasonality. We did dip a little bit lower. And again, this is why prices are staying elevated. There's not enough inventory coming online. Let's look at your price cuts. So we know in a more normal market, 1/3 of all homes would take a price cut every year, 33%. We're sitting at 32.73% right now. And so what does this tell us? Like, as we're looking at this, well, only 1/3 of homes are taking a price cut. So it is recent price reductions, right? So has the home taken as many price reductions as it's already going to do? Do we have more sellers that are equity rich that don't need to take any price cuts and they just want to see, and they might become that landlord that they weren't planning on becoming a landlord? Yes, I think this plays into it as well. So as we're looking at this, everyone, like we're just seeing that not a lot of price cuts are happening. And so I think a lot of it, again, has to do with equity in homes, and they are going to let it sit. They've already moved to their new home, and they're going to wait to see if they need to sell it or they need to rent it because they have a dollar in their head to where they're not going to let this home go for any less than. So we go through, this is the week ahead. So this is the week that we're in. It says, to make myself, he says, clearer than ever, no current economic data really matters as long as the Iranian conflict isn't resolved. 100% agree, right? Like we talk about this, guys, like the only thing that I think that would like catastrophically drop home prices is war. And we're doing something over there, right? We're absolutely involved in this 100%. So it says oil prices can rise much higher because again, they're also not letting any oil come through, right? There's no oil coming out of this area right now. And so, again, while we do have some stewardship to what I believe, and again, I'm not super educated on this with Venezuela oil, and while we do have oil reserves in the United States, we're going to play this thing out. We're going to see what it looks like. It says, which means higher gas prices, jet fuel, diesel prices. So what does that mean? Well, that means food prices are going to go up, right? Because how does that food get to Colorado? How does any food that's not grown or made in the United States or in Colorado get to Colorado? Well, it comes by truck, it comes by plane, right? So you're going to see food prices go up. Why? Because King Soopers is also not a nonprofit. All right. So it says, even though we have a lot of economic data, that's going to be released, this conflict's going to change some things even more. So it says, note, this existing home sales report coming out this week is the last report that will include the snow impact. Right. Remember, frozen iguanas. You can be sure that like clockwork, every rookie faking housing expert in the United States has no idea why existing home sales fell last month and still won't understand that they're low this month. And again, because the snow, right? We saw when Florida gets snow, guys, people stop buying houses. But let's look at interest rates. So here you are. This is data as of yesterday. This is Monday, and this is just 3 months. So I left it on 3 months to start, just so you guys can see kind of where we've come over like 1/4 of time. And so you can see that we have been going down on this little bit of a roller coaster, which we do not like to see. We don't want to see these ebbs and flows. This is what gives your buyers this idea that they can time the market. And this is what gives your sellers the uncertainty that if I put my home on the market today, I don't know what interest rates are going to look like 90 days because we're seeing homes sit for that long. But if we look at 1 month, guys, we can also see that like there's really been no traction. We've come back up, right? Like we're almost pretty flat to where we were in 1 month's time. And this is what just goes to show you no one had war with Iran on their bingo card. So it's almost impossible to go through and be able like, I'm going to time the market with things that are happening so that I can make sure that I get the best interest rate. Guys, our only job in this environment is to make sure that we're having as many conversations as possible, know what our people's motivations are, why they're thinking about moving, why they're thinking about selling, why they're thinking about buying, right? So that we can go through and we can help them as their real estate economist of choice. Guys, timing the market is so garbage. And there is no world where we can do this. Again, like if we look at this, even just 6 months in time, we've come down significantly, but people live in the moment and they're living in these ebbs and flows. And there's different things that are happening to where after the event happens, we can pretty much say, well, prices are probably going to go up. Interest rates are going to go up. But we have no clue what's happening tomorrow. We have no clue what's going to be happening with Iran. We know nothing. And yet, what we also know is this: if interest rates do come down, which we are predicting at some point this year, the interest rates do come down, what happens? Well, that means the cost of money is more affordable. We do see more people raise their hand, which does create some inflation because we will see more people more willing to spend money because it was cheaper to borrow that money. And these are the conversations that we need to be educated on enough to have so that we can help our buyers and our prospective sellers make the best decision for them and their families.